Hello and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. In today's episode, I'm joined by Toby McKinnon. Toby started off originally in agency land, then moved over to marketing roles in fairly established businesses, including Bank of Queensland and Intuit QuickBooks, before taking the leap over as CMO at Sapia.ai, a recruitment-focused tech startup, which in 2022 raised $17 million and is slowly taking over the world. We met in 2021, so you're officially a COVID friend, and we've both sort of bonded over really enjoying B2B, sort of different approach to B2B work. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much. 2021 feels like it's such a long time ago.
I know, I'm sorry. It feels like you've known me forever, ball and chain. So give me a quick overview. I sort of mentioned in the intro about your sort of marketing career. Would love to hear it in your words.
Look, yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, I spent the better part of probably 15 years in advertising, and you know, I wouldn't change it for the world. Although I would have potentially some guidance or insights for anyone wanting to get into it. I think these days it's changed a lot since then. But you know, just ploughing my kind of wares and learnings, both in Australia and in North America as well, it was absolutely fantastic. And I think kind of it's in part kind of shaped where my career's gone, because I'd call myself, if you were to ask, you know, what sort of marketer am I, probably creatively adaptable would be the best way. And I say that for two-pronged, right? Because the creative side comes from the advertising industry. You know, I've worked with some of the world's biggest brands, you know, the Chevrons of the world, the Dr. Pepper Snapple Groups of the world, and amazing creative people, core creative people. But what that I think really did was actually teach me not just to be creative per se as an ad, but actually creative thinking. And I've sort of tried to take that through all of my career. And then the adaptability side comes through relative to industries, in that you work, as you would well know, in the advertising industry. You know, one minute you can be working on a car brand, the next minute you're on a franchised retail organization, the next minute on infertility clinics. I mean, it's everything in between. So you have to learn to be adaptable. You have to learn to understand the industry you put in, and really scale that knowledge really rapidly. So that adaptability becomes, you know, super important. And I also think that then lays into how people hire, and good leaders, how they hire as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love the idea of creative adaptability. What do you think about the pace of agency land setting you up for your career? What did you sort of learn from a nuts and bolts perspective?
I think one of the reasons why a lot of people in advertising want to become a marketer in a corporate organisation is that they're not beholden to somebody else's schedule and calendar.
You mean you can leave at 5:01?
Well, in theory, yes, but actually it doesn't. In reality, it doesn't work that way. I think all the teams I've worked with will always they'll reference, you know, Toby's reality. So it's not that in real life. You're just different pressures, right? In that, yes, you are beholden to deadlines, but they're often internal teams or internal departments that you're working with to try and hit that end objective. It's not just delivering on a brief on a certain date. So I don't think that's a reason to make the change.
So tell me a bit about Sapia, and then also what foundations did you come into the role as CMO with that were already established? What was the sort of state of play, and what did you decide on the job to be done?
Look, I think with Sapia, then called Predictive Hire, fundamentally it was a fantastic product, and so I think that there was really one thing that I wanted to make sure, you know, before actually signing the dotted line was, you know, what is the product? And the chief data scientist there, you know, talking to him about it, you know, left with no uncertainty that it is an amazing product, that it is actually doing really good in the world, which is fantastic. So that was kind of the first one, and then kind of the culture and the leadership were the others. So, you know, sort of assessing those kind of core aspects were pretty important to consider the organisation. And then coming in, it was, okay, well, what do we need to do? You know, there was a marketing team of two at the time. We didn't have any real tech. There wasn't a brand, and the founder had said, I think one of the things we need to consider is the brand and the role of the brand. And so it was really a building from the ground up. They'd got to a point where it was ready to scale now, and the foundations need to be put in place in the right way to make sure they could set themselves up in that right trajectory. So it was exciting, you know, in that regard. And so from a, you know, if you remove the tech, the campaign development, the demand generation, that aspect of it, and just think about the brand piece, the idea of aligning brand to the product roadmap, it was good in a way that kind of said what it did on the tin, predictive hire, and that's in essence what it was doing at the time, but the product evolution was going to be so much more than that. And so the name had to actually adapt to where the business was going to go, and also be more aligned in the tech space in other geographic markets as well. So it was almost like the perfect alignment of stars where all these aspects needed to be worked on. And so a very, very small team then set about, and with you guys as well at Cello, to get moving.
Give me the quick overview of what Sapia is and does.
In essence, it is a front end kind of recruitment hiring tool that basically large businesses like the Qantases of the world and Bunnings and Woolworths will use to interview. They'll have tens of thousands of interviews on an annual basis, and they can use Sapia to interview the volume of candidates and give them a fantastic experience, and not only analyze what they say but how they say it, using the AI in the background and the large language model to then actually outline how closely aligned are that applicant's personality traits to what we would deem success within the role model. And it'll stack rank all those applicants. That then means that the hiring team can either pick and choose from the top people, face-to-face interview, or hire them instantly. So it can significantly reduce the time to hire, for one. It's blind, so it completely removes bias. So particularly candidates that are sort of neurodiverse, it opens up a world to them. And really importantly, the thing I loved about it was that every single candidate actually had a response back from their application, because it's 5 simple questions in your own time. And then you receive an email back where your answers are actually analysed and you're given some coaching traits based on your answers, which for the most part, people that are applying for these types of roles would never have in their life. And the feedback and the experience that those candidates have was second to none. So amazing product, and continuing to evolve and getting some big brand names, both in Australia and overseas.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, we're recording this in 2024, but when you started on the brand journey with Predictive Hire that then became Sapia, it was very much before the mass conversations around AI that we've been having in the last sort of 18 months, championed by the likes of ChatGPT. Tell me a bit about, exposure and the category of AI and technology broadly, and sort of the job to be done from a marketing sense.
In terms of, we sort of joked that we were AI before AI became cool, and it was kind of fortuitous timing, I guess, that Sapia.ai came about, because we obviously were inherently an AI organization, but we didn't have AI in the name, but we couldn't register the URL, so it became Sapia.ai. So it sort of played in our favor. But when back in those early days, we would talk to prospects about the platform and the use of AI, and more often than not, there was an inherent concern around AI. And what does it actually mean? People even referred to Will Smith and iRobot, that robots are coming to take over the world, because it was so unknown. And this is only, 3 or 4 years ago now, right? So it's not a huge amount of time. And then, over the period of years with the likes of ChatGPT, and, if COVID was the buzzword a couple of years ago, well, AI and ChatGPT are now, right? It is ever present. So we were there beforehand, but knocking on doors where people were hesitant because they didn't understand. And so there was a lot of education to be done around AI and the role of AI in any organization and any business unit. Now it's kind of ever present.
And so how do you reconcile that with the marketing function at the time? Was a lot of your time from a marketing perspective spent on educating people on the benefits of AI, or did you go sort of brand-led and it doesn't really matter about the tech, we'll just get it done?
It was conjunction with sales, right? So lockstep with the sales org, that where we were, and it's a startup, remember, so it's not like we're hugely within paid media and out there everywhere in the market. Every conversation that we're having with prospects, we had to develop sales toolkits that would align around what that business was likely going to need. And so there were elements of the approach that we would talk to AI, but it wasn't the kind of the main focus. It was more around the benefit to the business as well as the customer impact as well. AI just happened to be the tool in the background that we would use, and that would be the part that then you'd have to educate. Once you got sort of further along the prospect purchase path and they had questions about, well, the how of the model behind, how did it actually happen? That's where we would talk about it. But early stage, it wasn't necessarily kind of upfront and in the spotlight.
Yeah. I love the story and the idea that the URL wasn't available, so you went with AI. You could put that down to a hunch. You sort of had
Yeah.
it's not available, let's go with this. We think it's sort of an interesting way to talk about the brand into the future and how well that's served you today.
I'd like to say it was planned, but it wasn't.
So how has your role evolved as a CMO? You went in, what was it, sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and you had a lot of foundational stuff. I'm sure you were doing auditing and mapping and establishing sort of the scene. How has your role evolved since then over the years?
Look, I guess it's a pretty broad question, right? I think it's evolved in terms of marketing capabilities and how you actually approach a go-to-market strategy, and that is multi-layered and multi-tiered, and it's ever evolving. I think that's one of the things with the marketing landscape is that every day there is a new platform and technology that we can use to improve workflows or capture and measure data, optimize media spends. It is ever present and ever evolving. I'd say the other part is probably leadership in terms of, I think I'm a work in progress, as a leader, and I spend a lot of time on it. I'm a firm believer that doesn't matter the size of the organization, that if you are a leader, I think everyone is a leader inherently. You just have to practice at it. But it is a learned practice, and it's something that you need to spend a lot of time on. And I'm quite passionate about it. So I think for me, it's a combination of both the marketing skill sets, but also the leadership skill sets, because that will then make the marketing we do even better.
And so tell me a bit about the buy-in from senior leaders, whether it's at a CFO level or CEO level. I know Barb Hyman, CEO at Sapia, is really experienced and a sort of strong commercial leader. How did you talk about the softer components of marketing, whether it's sort of the hunches or the more creative aspects? You talked at the start about creative agility and adaptability. How did you get commercial thinkers on board with that?
I think in the instance of Sapia, it was a different landscape because it was a startup and we were moving at pace and we had to differentiate in the market. Barb is a well-seasoned, well-rounded leader who gets the idea of creativity and relevant differentiation, which is really important, and particularly in the industry that Sapia operates, that there needed to be that. So to convince her of that wasn't difficult at all. She was completely on board with it. Obviously, we need to know, are there any non-negotiables in terms of where the business has come from to where it's going to be? But in terms of that support, I think it is we had that from day one. I think really, whereas you evolve with any organization, but particularly in a startup because budgets are limited and you're constantly watching your burn rate, is where is the funding best allocated across the business? And it needs to be where that needs to go, right? In terms of, if more funding needs to go into product and product team members, then it needs to go there. If it needs to go into sales, then it needs to go into sales. And so as a leadership team and all, we had a very fluid budget allocation on a kind of a month-to-month, quarterly basis to see how we were going. But the role of kind of brand and marketing was always kind of core into it, particularly the brand element. The way we took it to market varied depending on where the business was at any given point in time. In a bigger organization, quite different. I think brand can often be probably the first thing to get cut. I think the drive to purely hit a KPI can actually cause downside of really good brand building. But again, if you can prove out the why and the how and what the return is going to be at a total level, then it's an easier buy-in, right? Because brand plays one element, but it can't play an element by itself. I've always said everything that sells must brand, and everything that brands must sell. So collectively, they have to work together, but you need to be able to show and map that whole plan, not just brand alone.
You mentioned before that the organisation went through a naming change from Predictive Hire to Sapia.ai, as well as a sort of visual refresh or rebrand. How did you know that the first version of the brand wasn't fit for purpose?
That was a hunch. It was a hunch. And to be honest, Barb as the founder, it was probably a hunch that she had initially as well. We sort of talked about it, and purely in its look and feel, it didn't feel modern. It didn't feel innovative. It didn't feel aligned to the customer. HR is a heavily female skewed industry, and it was a very harsh sort of brand look and feel and identity in the marketplace, and dated. And so, it was pretty clear that something needed to be done, and really rapidly. I think we went through with you guys and the Cello team, start to finish. I think the first conversation was in December, and we were in market in March the following year. And that was a lot of work done in a very short period of time by a very small team of people.
Yeah, amazing. And when looking retrospectively at the work that you did on the Sapia brand over your time with Sapia, what would you say has been your biggest win?
I'd say the color. Purely from a brand perspective, it's pink, and it's not every day that you. And when you talk about buy-in and leadership buy-in, Barb was one thing, but she was always there. But we needed to get the rest of the leadership team as well as the broader organisation on board with the rebrand, and it was an unexpected choice for many. But again, then when we took them through the process of why we did what we did, we showed them the kind of the prospect and the end user and what appeals to them. We showed them the category where our competitors' brands were sitting as well. And it just made sense. And there was an element of, we trust you, Toby and team, that this is the right thing. Some people said, we love it, absolutely love it from day one. Others said, I'm still on the fence. But you fast forward a pretty short period of time, and we would turn up at industry events, and consistently having a presence at these events over time. People would come up to us and say, "I've seen you guys before. I had to come over and find out what you're all about." And we also had pink Sapia hats, so we would make sure they were strategically placed, in different forums of speakers and so on and so forth. And it wasn't uncommon for a moderator at an event to call out, someone in the pink hat. So it was a nice moment. I always said that my career would be done when I saw someone walking down the street in a pink Sapia hat or hoodie. I haven't yet seen it, but I have relocated, so I'm pretty sure that they're out there.
I love that the a simple component of the rebrand as colour has become so distinctive and memorable for you. You've sort of really doubled down on owning it. Tell me about creative adaptability, digging deeper on that. What does that mean to you when you've taken single brand focused roles, so no longer in an agency across multiple brands? What does that adaptability look like there?
All encompassing in any large organisation or corporate. You always have your 360 reviews and looking at how you can improve on yourself and as a part of a team. And a lot of the feedback I had was that, on my own kind of approach and performance, was that I would tend to listen first and absorb and take different points of view on board, and then consider, is there an alternative way to putting forward what we're suggesting? Now, that could be in terms of KPI setting, that could be in terms of a strategic product evolution, quarterly planning, anything within the business. You can apply creative thinking to how you solve that problem. It's not just a kind of creative solution per se. So it's all encompassing, and I always try and encourage teams to. I used to have a phrase say, you got to go wide to go narrow, right? Like, think of all the creative possibilities or different options that are out there as far-fetched as possible to then hone in on the one that you need. And if you can't go that wide way, then you're not going to hit on the best outcome, in my opinion.
And do you think that's something that can be taught, or do you think it's inherent?
No, I absolutely think it can be taught. Yeah. I am a fundamental believer that there is creativity in every single person. It's just how it manifests itself. What is your channel? It's not just, am I a painter or am I a writer? You can be creative in your own world, and it doesn't have to be the creative arts per se. And it's a practice, I think, but it absolutely can be taught.
How have you managed that as a marketing leader in terms of stewarding an idea or an approach without wanting to kill terrible ideas? How have you sort of managed teams with their own creative process?
I've often asked the question, is this the best we can do? And it's a positive question, right? Like, is this the best that we can do? And if the answer, when people take time to really think about it and they challenge themselves, oftentimes that's actually, I did have my own doubts about it, but we wanted to move forward anyway. And you might get to the point to say, well, 80% is good enough, right? But if you're constantly asking yourself, is this good enough? Then, you may find you'll be able to push a different way.
So on this sort of topic of marketing science, the data, and looking back retrospectively to be able to look forward and looking at all the different metrics and touch points any senior marketer is keeping an eye on versus having a hunch around an approach, how have you sort of directed your career?
That's a good question. I would say, back when I was in a core advertising role, there really wasn't a lot of data. We just didn't have the technology then. It makes me sound like I'm really old. And a lot of it was hunch driven. Potentially the way you would use some data in a way would be focus groups and creative testing, which I think is, it can be fraught with danger, particularly from a creative aspect. And there's many stories that can ruin good creative ideas. But it wasn't so data led at that point in time. And in part, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to move from kind of core advertising into a marketing role within a corporate, in that I felt that I didn't have a line of sight to how impactful the work that I was doing was in the marketplace. And I kind of wanted to have that accountability and ownership to see a campaign, through and through, right through to working with other teams in an organisation. And that's when I was living in the States and working for WPP at the time. I said that to the vice president of Y&R, and I said, look, I'm spending more time in my clients' offices with them and their teams, and I'm really, really interested and passionate about that, more so than I think I am in our own offices. And he said, great, well, let's work out how we can transition you from this role into that role. And he championed me being able to sort of relocate back to Australia and ended up kind of getting out of advertising per se.
Amazing. And how admirable for someone that's, within agency network land to help you land the role that's the right fit for you, even if it's outside of WPP.
He was a phenomenal leader. Yeah.
And so tell me a bit about the reality of then being in large organisation marketing department side. Was that true? Did you feel then that you had more input on commercial end goals?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, look, you have to, right? I mean, you're ultimately accountable for a budget. You are given targets, or, you develop targets depending on kind of where you are in the organization, and you're accountable for delivering on them or not. And if you don't, what did you learn from it and how do you go again? But that aspect of marketing takes it to, I think, a more serious level than, the core advertising role back in the day, where it was just about developing creative campaigns and getting them to market. You'd always have a vested interest in, have they worked? And I think now, if you fast forward 20 years, it's a very different role being in an advertising agency, because agencies now are more structured to actually have skin in the game and be more data driven to make sure that the work they're developing actually works. So different world now than it was then, but 100% within the marketing capacity, owning that P&L and having to report that up into leadership change, again, depending on how big the business is vital.
So looping back to your earlier point around there weren't that many data inputs, so it was much more hunch back in agency land days. Do you feel like you've sort of moved along that scale with more data points now?
You can't do anything now without data. It's ever present, and it needs to be. It needs to be within the bounds of having to use a hunch or a calculated guess that something is going to work. You can sometimes have that leap of faith assumption to say, well, 90% of our quarterly plan is built, locked and loaded and forecasted, not only at a quarterly level, but at a monthly level, weekly level, and even to a point that we have certain points where we'll have KPIs on a daily basis, right? But then there's that 10% where you take caution to the wind. That's where your creativity can really come in to say, look, let's try something new here, that we will make a leap of faith assumption that if we do this, this will happen, but we don't know. And there is an inherent risk in doing that, but you're only apportioning a small portion of your budget and your time to be able to do that. And then if it works, then fantastic, you can double down and do it again. But there's still underlying premise of data beneath it.
And so how have you managed to garner buy-in from a CFO or CEO or more senior commercial thinker when you're sort of saying, we've got this little bucket for high risk activity? How have you sold that in?
I think it depends on the size and the type of the organisation and the leader, to be honest. I think one of the benefits of big businesses, big global entities or even, national entities here in Australia, is that you do have the luxury of budgets. But with that comes a very structured target approach, and then your KPIs are drilled right down, as I said before. It takes a certain type of leader and culture to allow that level of risk to try that extra amount. I mean, when the chips are down, you're trying to do everything you can to hit that target. It's very easy to say, well, that 10% is not there. In a smaller organisation, it's a little bit like more anything can go, right? Like we've got nothing to lose, or we've got less to lose, I should say. And it's beholden to us to try and be a bit more risky, to try something new. And if it works, fantastic, then let's go again. If it doesn't, great, let's move on. And move on really quickly in that instance. I think it really depends on the size of the organisation. As I said there, the other side is the leader. Is the leader of that group or team or business unit prepared to try and look at new programs to then put forward as this is best practice. In our team, we have a culture of innovation and trying things new, and we mandate that every week or every month or every quarter, each team member and team allocates a little bit of time to do that kind of riskier creative thinking. And if they foster that through the team, then it's an easier sell.
Thinking back to your corporate roles that you've had in marketing teams, how have you defined brand in that context, and what kind of levers were you able to shift?
I really think it's a summation of a range of collective experiences that really just elicit some form of emotion, right? And I think the businesses that do this very well, brand is ever present across everything. And I think customer service teams play a huge role in brand. I think about some of the brands that I love, and they have a customer service team that will stop at nothing to make sure that that prospect or customer is happy. And if they're living, what the brand has set out to be, then I'm left with a positive impression of that. So I'm then going to talk about it. I mean, it's not rocket science, but I do think that the brand has to be ever present. So it's built into the product. It's built into the customer service team. It's built into the way you hire people. It's built into the way you exit people. It is everywhere through an organization, because then every time I see, feel, touch, hear of this brand or this product, I'm left with that same positive emotion or negative.
Yeah. And so who do you think owns brand in an organisation? Whose responsibility is it? So often we hear that a marketing department has a head of brand, or, there's a brand project within the marketing context. But rarely, if ever, does customer service sit under marketing and all aspects, products sit under marketing. So who owns brand, and how do you reconcile that?
Everyone owns brand. And I actually remember back in the Bank of Queensland days, we went through a full rebrand. And we did a roadshow with Stuart Grimshaw, the then sort of CEO. And he hired me. I was doing some consulting, a brand review for him and the board at the time. And then he offered me the job a week after. And I said, Stuart, I'm not a banker. And he said, Toby, I don't need another one. I've got thousands of them. I need people that can come on board the business here, that can champion the customer, think about things differently, lift up every stone, turn it over if it's the right way of doing it, or if it's not, change it, just make change happen. And I need people like that across the whole organization. And he hired people like that, right? And so what that then permeated was there was sort of a foundation of leadership within the bank that were open to change and supportive. And so when it came to a rebrand, we did a roadshow around the whole country. And each time I'd get up, I would say to the network, I'm hired here as in part the brand guy, but I'm not responsible for the brand. You are, and you are, and you are. Every single one of us is. There was a story of one of the corporate guys who actually came in, and it was under the guise of it's possible to love a bank. So it was kind of challenging for the time, right? Because everyone hates the big four banks. And so everything that we were doing at the bank was to prove that actually it is possible to love a bank. So the guise was that we just wanted them to hate us a little bit less. Yeah, we wouldn't say that externally, but internally that's kind of what it was. And this corporate guy was actually at a supermarket. It was a true story. And there was a woman who was going to pay for her groceries and her bank card didn't work. So he actually leant forward and he tapped his card, and she was absolutely taken aback. And he said, look, I'm from the Bank of Queensland. We believe in doing things differently, and we think it is possible to love a bank. And he came back and he told that story. And at that point I thought, well, this is fantastic. We've got the foundations here that people get internally, and they're living and they're breathing it. And then we had to foster that, and then more and more stories would come up. So it's not one person's responsibility, it's everybody's. And if it is one person's responsibility, it'll fail a dismal death.
I know you've been through a variety of rebrands through your career, and I think I'm so passionate about the difference between branding and creating a brand strategy and stories, usually led by a marketing team or a project team for a rebrand, then key being the communication to the rest of the team, the organisation embodying that work. It's very useless if it sits in a drawer as a brand book or tools that are too far-fetched from an end consumer or somebody on the front face of the business. I love your idea that everyone is responsible for brand and putting it back in the hands of people that are interacting with customers every day.
Absolutely.
So you seem to have smoothly shifted from large corporate marketing departments into startup land. Would love to know a bit about your journey there and what it was that excited you about the move over.
Smoothly is not a word I would use, and for good reason, right? I've always wanted to kind of challenge myself and do things differently. So from working in advertising in Australia over into North America and learning a whole new country and understanding how consumers work over there, through to moving into marketing and then different industries within that. The opportunity to get into startups was kind of a box that I always wanted to tick. I've had friends and family members who have been in startups, some successfully, others not. And there was always something about it that really interested me, and the opportunity came up and with the founder at the time, and I still remember she said, let's consider this like a first date. She said, if you like me and I like you, you never know where it might go. And one thing led to another, and I ended up coming on board. But it was much like moving into banking. I remember the COO at the time who said to me, my only concern with you, Toby, is your culture fit. You're coming from advertising and we're a regional bank. And, I want to make sure that you can adapt into the culture. And, hindsight, I was there for 6 years, so obviously I was able to. But that adaptability is really important. And on the flip side, when I moved into startup world, in fact, it was the COO as well, said to me, you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And if you're not prepared to roll up your sleeves here, then don't come on board. And he was really transparent, about that fact. And he was absolutely right in that in a startup environment, you are doing things that you haven't done in many, many, many years. If you think you're going to be in a marketing role, in your own vertical for one, and you have teams and budgets to do everything, it's just not the case. You will be taking pull-up banners at events and setting up booths. You'll be packing them down at the end of the day. It's by any stretch of the imagination, but it's really fulfilling because you're there and you're seeing the change happen literally on a day-to-day basis. And really, really small wins are really, really big in a startup versus in a bigger organization. They can often go unseen. So the energy you have in the startup is fantastic, but you do have to go into it with your eyes wide open, knowing, what it is that you're getting into. But it's fun.
Yeah, amazing. I know something you and I are both really passionate about is B2B brands being less traditionally B2B. And by that, I mean not just kind of the old ad thinking around direct mail and boring everything. Where do you think this comes from for you? Why are you particularly passionate about B2B being reimagined?
I don't think it's necessarily about B2B. I think it's about people. I studied psychology before I studied business management. I didn't finish it. I did transfer halfway through, but I have an innate passion and interest in people. And so I think it's not just B2B per se, but it is that at the end of every single purchase, doesn't matter what industry, product, service you're selling, there's a person. And I believe that innately that human beings like to be engaged and entertained. And even if it's an enterprise grade product, you are enjoying seeing things out in the marketplace and in your own personal space, and even in your work environment that cut through on a bit different. And even if it engages you and stops you for 2 seconds in that first instance and creates that memorable moment, even as small as it might be, in time you're going to come back to it. So I'm a firm believer that there's absolutely no reason that B2B brands can't be more engaging than they have been historically. You look at the sales forces of the world. They're doing some amazing creative work that's cutting through, and I think more and more it's going to happen because those brands that don't entertain and engage in the right format, right? I mean, there is a time for function and factual aspects, particularly given sales cycles are longer, and they're going to be needed to justify often what is a larger expense. But that first top of the funnel engagement absolutely can and should be differentiated.
And across your career, how have you decided on the split between top of funnel brand building all the way through to really niche performance?
I think it really varies on the state of the business itself, the budgets and allocation. There's always going to be an element of test and learn. I have found there's been instances where if we're heading towards the end of a quarter, we may well reallocate budget from top of the funnel work to more lower and mid funnel work in an effort to kind of get us over that finishing line. Is that the right decision? Not necessarily for a long-term organization, but it can be done if it needs to be done. But back to the original point that everything that must sell should brand, and everything that brands should sell, it is that combination of the two. So it doesn't matter whether it is lower funnel, there's still an element of brand to it.
Who's your sort of pin-up brand? Who do you think does brand really well?
There's a lot of them. For me, really, any brand that walks the walk to me appeals. And I say that in that it is in their DNA a values, purpose-driven organization. There's a company called Nike. I don't know if you know them, but they sell hammocks. And, I bought one because they engaged with me on social media. And then as I looked into them, it looked like, well, this is an amazing product for one. It's made from recycled bottles. That not only that is that they plant a tree for every hammock that they sell, but also, everything that they do in terms of their customer service and the experience that you have is aligned to that. And it's just a really good experience. And there's a lot of those brands out. I mean, Patagonia is always one that's talked about, but there are a huge amount. I did an interview last week with a company called NatPat, who make these little patches for kids. And the 3 founders really started the business because they wanted to solve parenting problems. And they're making these products specifically for problems that they as parents face, that they think other parents can benefit from. But they also have an ethos that they don't want to grow too big because they love the job that they're doing. And the bigger they get, the less of that passion they feel that they can have. So they're going to limit the size of the business to kind of where it needs to be. But then in addition to that, they have a customer service policy that if you are absolutely not happy with your product whatsoever, they will guarantee they'll give you the money back. And there's only about a 5% return in that regard. But also the founders like to try and respond to every single person where they can themselves. Now they know that's not necessarily scalable, but they're actually working on a way that they can try and make that scalable. And so the passion that they have for every touch point and every customer, I think, comes through. So for me, the kind of brands like that, not necessarily the hallmark brands that you might see out there in the marketplace.
I love that idea that, we talk around the shift in the early days of startups, building the first iteration of brand being sort of often founder-centric, whether or not the founder's face is on it, but it's very much the thoughts, the thinking, the approach of the founder. And then eventually there's an inflection point where it's more around the market solution fit, standing on its own 2 feet. And I think what you're getting at there is that from a funding perspective, everything's about scale and, keeping the heart, whether it's the product or the brand or the opportunity that the organization's solving, and scaling it commercially. And I think from a brand perspective, an interesting question to solve is sort of how do we scale founder sentiment? The passion, the enthusiasm that is what started and sort of got the organization off the ground. How do you scale that into the future? And I think whether it's copy, whether it's sort of finishing touch from a founder, I know there's organizations that will send out CEOs to customers, and the surprise and delight, trying to keep the common thread of that senior executive all the way through to customer, I think is underdone and really important. And then if you add to that all the content you can deliver and capture from those beautiful moments, I think we'll see more of it in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally it comes back, it's almost full circle, right? It comes back to the people you hire.
Yeah.
It's the people that make the culture. And if people are aligned on the purpose of the organization, what they're trying to achieve, and the founder's trying to achieve, then they're in the tent together. And the people that aren't, they tend to get weeded out pretty quickly because it's not a fit for them, it's not a fit for the company, and that's okay too.
And I think that's the great thing around clarity and accountability. This is who we are and this is what we stand for as a brand through the sort of articulation of brand strategy, and then hiring people that embody that, sort of like oil and water. If you're not the right fit, that's fine, but we're really clear on why we're here and where we're heading.
Completely agree.
I hear so many marketers in my world anyway, toying with the idea of moving from large organisation into startup. You mentioned it's a box you felt you needed to tick. What would you say to somebody that has been running a large marketing department thinking about moving into startup land? How can they get themselves primed? What could they, whether it's resources or mindset or things to get right from the start?
I think it's probably mindset, right? As I said earlier, that if you're not prepared to roll up your sleeves and really be on the tools and be a team member as well as a leader, then you really want to consider whether it's right for you, because every single day is going to be different. There's ebbs and there's flows. There are challenges that unforeseen, which you could never have accounted for if you'd planned it out. It just doesn't happen. And that's very different than in a large organization, because you don't have the luxury of time to try and fix it. You've just got to fix it right there and then and put that fire out, then move to the next one. It is a bit of a cliche to say it like that, but it's true, right? And it's energizing and exciting, but you need to be really clear about what you're getting into before you do that, because it's a different world than being in a big corporate.
So on that note, what's next for you?
I'm continuing doing some consulting for startup scale-ups, which I have a passion for. I think once you've had a taste for it, it is great because you can inherently make a difference really quickly to these kind of businesses. So I'm going to continue on that path. And I'm also, I haven't actually mentioned to you, but I have a partner with two other people and looking at a people management platform, which really is focused around well-being and academically outlined to positively impact an employee's well-being that increases their capacity, which also then leads to productivity and performance gains for an organization. So it's a win-win in terms of the individual person gets benefit in the corporate workplace, that their whole lives are actually a better functioning version of themselves, but then they're actually able to deliver more with an organization, and there are commercial gains on that side of it as well. So looking at building that out and getting to market fairly soon.
How incredible. I had no idea. I feel like it's breaking news podcast.
It kind of is, yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been such an enjoyable and interesting conversation. For me, I took out of it the importance of creative adaptability throughout your career, whether it's large organisation or small team starting something from scratch, how important that thread has been throughout your career.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been fantastic.